Yorick Jungle is back in a big way for 25.7 due to his massive changes. Xerath is now in a terrible spot for support, and Catalyst users in mid lane are absolutely dominating the meta. So in today's video, we'll be breaking all that down and much more as we provide you guys with a complete update on any new emerging trends and the solo queue tier list for every single role. And I don't know about you, but locking in an OP ADC like Jinx or Tristana will only get you so far if your support is running it down every game. But what if we told you there's a workaround? Our brand new Bronze to Diamond course is engineered to have you reach Diamond in just 90 days, regardless of how boosted your supports may be. You'll follow along Zot's journey, learning all the intricate tactics he's using to go from being a legit Bronze player who never touched the game to making it to Diamond in just 90 days. Trust us, if Zot can reach Diamond, anyone can. So this is the perfect course for all ADC players looking to take that next step for Season 15. And that's just for ADC. Your mid lane OP tier Ahri pick from this tier list becomes actually unstoppable when you know all the essentials of mid lane, thanks to the new mid lane series over on our platform that our top 10 challenger player Strompist has tirelessly worked on exclusive to our members. Our tier list gets you the right champions, SkillCapped gets you the right skills. And we're so confident it works, if you don't climb 5 divisions while actively using the platform, you literally don't pay a single cent. So why hold yourself back this season and finally get the rank you deserve? And with that being said, let's get into it. So the biggest changes issued this patch were to Yorick, and he's now in a great spot as a top laner and a jungler. For top lane, Yorick can actually lane pretty well now. The changes to Q, to where the cooldown has been reduced by 1 second, along with the fact that you can now spawn graves when hitting an enemy with Q, has been big. Most of your power with Yorick is now in his Q, as the damage also went up. So what works best now is you actually take Grasp for your Keystone rune, and just play around Q cooldown to whittle your opponents down with Grasp procs. In terms of builds on Yorick, Trinity Force is still looking like the most reliable way to play him, so nothing changes on that front. Mistwalkers definitely aren't as powerful as before, which can be seen as a bad or a good thing. In a way, it makes Yorick even easier to play because a lot of his power budget is now in his point and click Q, but at the same time, that skill expression of hitting E on the enemy and watching your Mistwalkers eat away at them is no longer as satisfying. We noted in the pre-patch tier list that with Yorick's early game becoming better in exchange for a weaker late game, that he could become more high elo skewed, but it's not looking like that's the case. With less reliance on Mistwalkers to deal damage and more reliance on Q, in a way, Yorick is just easier to succeed with now and doesn't require as much skill expression, which is likely why he continues to perform better in the lower ranks, despite power being shifted around from his late and early game. In a way, this does make Yorick better for solo queue though, because less reliance on having to land your E and more power in a point and click spell is going to be net positive for the average player's success rate. Riot did actually issue a few hotfix changes though to boost the damage of Mistwalkers in the later game. The base damage of Mistwalkers has gone up from 15 scaling to 75 to 15 scaling to 100. Mistwalkers damage to monsters has gone down though from 100 to 60%, but this more heavily affects Yorick jungle and not as much for top lane. Q healing has also been increased from 4 scaling to 8% missing health to 6 scaling to 10% missing health. Now, a day or so after Riot issued these first round of hotfixes, turns out Yorick became too powerful, so they had to issue a second round of hotfixes, this time being nerfs. So even though those first round of changes helped top lane Yorick, these second round nerfed him as E slow duration dropped from 2 to 1.5 seconds. E movement speed is down from 30% to 18 scaling to 30%, and then E armor shred is dropped from 18 scaling to 30% to 13 scaling to 25%. So even though Yorick saw a plethora of changes for this patch, his overall power level for solo queue has stayed pretty similar to where it was in 25.6 now that these hotfix buffs have been issued, and we'll be leaving him in the A tier for 25.7. So having a look at the top lane tier list, we're not seeing a whole lot of movement for mid patch. Other than the Yorick adjustments, the Yone changes were the most significant of the patch for top lane. Yone has seen his win rate increase by a full percentage point and is back in a very competitive spot for top lane, so we're moving him up into the top lane A tier. If you're not playing into a bruiser or tank top lane matchup, definitely look to try out the Wild Arrows rush for this patch. With Yone now gaining full value from crits, rushing a crit core has become much stronger, and Wild Arrows rush is currently winning about 1% more than Blade of the Ruined King. Our expectations going into the patch to where all the other top laners adjusted would not see a significant shift in power has played out. Volibear, Shen, Trundle, and Olaf have seen minimal increases in win rate due to their buffs, so there's no movement for them on the mid-patch tier list. So it turns out our pre-patch analysis for Naafiri was pretty spot on, because even with those nerfs being issued, she continued to dominate the jungle meta at the start of 25.7. So much so that Riot has had to go ahead and issue even more hotfix nerfs, and here's what they look like. Q first damage along with the bleed damage have both been lowered, more significantly at the later ranks. E damage is also down, while E cooldown has been increased by 2 seconds at rank 1 in the spell. These are definitely more meaningful nerfs than the ones we got at the start of the patch, as those nerfs have resulted in Naafiri losing a few percent off her win rate. So Naafiri had her time in the spot spotlight, but due to these hotfix nerfs, it will be coming to a close as she's getting bumped down into the jungle B tier. So it turns out that all the Yorick changes made him super OP in the jungle, as he eclipsed a 55% win rate at the very start of the patch. The fact Yorick can now spawn graves by simply hitting monsters with his Q has made him way stronger in the jungle. This has made it so that starting red or blue is the way to go now, so that you can charge up your graves and then summon your Mistwalkers to take down the next camp. You can also recall now while your Mistwalkers are taking down a camp, and they'll continue hitting that camp instead of returning to base with you, which helps to increase the tempo of Yorick jungle. For a complete and detailed breakdown of the Yorick jungle clear, then definitely check out Ninetales' updated guide, as he's a great resource for anything Yorick jungle. So to try and combat Yorick's insane spike in power for this patch, Riot has issued 2 separate rounds of hotfix nerfs. Now, he's still receiving the compensation buffs as well though to increase the later game damage of Mistwalkers and also increase the scaling of his Q heal. There are more nerfs to follow though, as a Mistwalker's damage taken from minions and monsters is up from 40 to 60%. E slow duration is dropping from 2 to 1.5 seconds. E movement speed is down from 30% to 18, scaling to 30%. E armor shred has been nerfed, going from 18 scaling to 30% to 13 scaling to 25%. And then R monster damage cap has been reduced from 50 to 30. So even with these hotfix nerfs being live for a couple of days, it's not looking like they are negatively influencing Yorick in the jungle all that much. With these hotfixes that go live in the middle of the patch, it's really difficult to accurately pinpoint the exact power of the champion. So with Yorick, he's definitely S tier, but whether he's still OP level like he was at the start of the patch is tough to say. Regardless of whether Yorick's in OP or S though, he's one of the best junglers that you can play on the patch, so definitely take advantage of him while you can. So for the jungle tier list for this patch, the biggest shakeup to the meta has definitely been Yorick rising from the grave and becoming a top tier pick. We moved Mundo jungle up into the S tier for pre-patch, and with popularity rising more for 25.7, his win rate has actually shot up even more as well. We really think that Mundo is on the verge of an OP tier spot right now, so even though his play rate remains a bit lower, we're going to be proactive here and give him the push up because we just think it's a matter of time before players really catch on. Generally, with lower play rates, even if the champ has a high win rate, it's not the best indication of how good the champ actually is, because a lot of the players picking the champ are likely mains or one tricks. However, Mundo is one of those exceptions to the rule because of how easy he is to play. Even if Mundo were to see a sharp increase in popularity in the coming patches, we don't think his win rate would suffer in the slightest, so definitely take advantage of him before more players catch on. We were optimistic that the brand buffs would put him back in a viable spot for jungle and had moved him into B tier for pre-patch, but we were wrong in that assumption. Brand continues to struggle right now, holding an extremely low win rate in the jungle, so he's getting moved back down into C tier for mid-patch. Brand and Skarner are just 2 junglers right now who have been absolutely decimated due to their pro play presence. Skarner especially is in such a terrible spot right now that his play rate has even dipped under 1%, which is honestly kinda sad to see for a recently reworked champion. Riot just hasn't been able to balance Skarner for both solo queue and pro play, so they're really going to have to go back to the drawing board here and potentially issue a mini rework to fix his issues. For the other junglers who were changed for this patch, being Gwen, Lilia, Shaco, Ivern, and Volibear, they haven't seen a power shift that didn't align with our expectations, so no additional movement on the tier list needed for them for mid-patch. So moving on to mid lane now, the biggest changes of the patch that have been influencing the role were the buffs to Catalyst. Due to these buffs, we have been seeing pro players running Rod of Ages on more champions, and Orianna is one of them. Duin B has been running a Rod into Liandry's core on Orianna, and what's interesting though is that based on the analytics so far, Rod Rush on Ori is not performing all that great. The core build of Rod of Ages into Liandry's actually has the lowest win rate out of the most popular core builds for Orianna, so we'll have to see as the patch progresses, but right now it's looking like Rod of Ages Rush could be a bit of a bait on champs who hadn't already liked the item. No access to ability haste at all does seem to be more detrimental for Orianna than it is for Ahri, as constant ball repositioning is quite vital for Orianna's mid-game success. One mid lane champ who we do think is pretty underrated with Rod of Ages right now is actually Galio. The thing with Galio is that he really wants to run his 2-item core of Hollow Radiance into Riftmaker, but the issue with rushing Hollow Radiance is that it's not really viable if the enemy team is heavy AD. You really don't want to rush Hollow Radiance if you're against a Yasuo, Yone, or Zed, while going for Sunfire Aegis in its place just doesn't feel that great. So this is where Rod of Ages can come in and be a nice pickup on Galio moving forward, as you can use it in place of Hollow Radiance when up against heavy AD. Even in 25.6, Rod of Ages Rush had a very good win rate on Galio, so with the Catalyst buffs coming through for this patch, don't sleep on the item in those select cases where the enemy comp is majority physical damage. So for the mid lane right now, there are honestly a lot of really strong champs to choose from in 25.7. Standing alone in the OP tier is going to be Ahri, as she's just a cut above everyone else right now. With Catalyst buff for this patch and Ahri's Bruiser build becoming even better, it's just separated her from the rest of the pack. Catalyst buffs haven't only helped out Ahri though, as we've seen a nice spike in power from many other users, Twisted Fate being one of the most significant. TF is a champion who wants to be proactive early on on and looking to snowball off our plays, so more early game power coming out of Catalyst is great for him. Rod of Ages itself didn't actually get much stronger, it just has the bonus mana restore buff, whereas Catalyst has a smoother build path and extra mana, so it's Rod of Ages users who can really benefit from that added early game strength of Catalyst that are better off. As for the new champs picking up Rod this patch, many of them really haven't been seeing as much success as you'd hope for, as Orianna, Victor, and Sylas have all seen a spike in play rate with the item, but none of them are actually winning more with Rod than their standard builds. Both Yone and Yasuo are in quite powerful spots right now after both champs received the same buff, although a few patches apart, to where the crits now deal full damage instead of 90%. If you're an ADC main, you literally could have just skipped the patch notes for 25.7 because there were 0 changes issued to the role. Not a single ADC was buffed or nerfed for this patch, so the meta has not shifted at all. Right now, we've got the likes of Tristana, Vayne, Jinx, and Lucian as who we'd group into that upper tier for ADC. We only have 3 slots in the OP tier, so want us to slide down into S, and with Vayne being the lower play rate of the 4, she'll be the odd one out. For the sake of everyone's elo for 25.7, unless you are an Ezreal main, there are many better options to choose from because after his recent nerf, he's just not worth it for the average player. For some reason, Ezreal tends to be that champ who auto-filled ADCs prioritize, but if you do get filled in the role, then Misfortune or Ashe are definitely who you should be putting higher priority on if you're really trying to win. So going into the patch, we noted in the pre-patch tier list how we were expecting for Xerath's support to lose power due to his adjustments, and that has been exactly how it's played out, with the base damage dropping on Xerath's W, E, and R in exchange for a higher AP ratio on W, Q, and R. It's been net negative for Xerath's support because of the fact he doesn't have access to the resources, so that the AP ratio buff outweighs the base damage nerfs. Higher base damage and lower ratios are almost always more beneficial for support champions because the lower gold income doesn't allow them to take advantage of the ratios as much as all the other roles. So due to these adjustments, we have seen Xerath's support's win rate drop by a little over 1%, and it now puts him in a spot to where he's just not worth playing as a mage support over alternative options like Vel'Koz, Neeko, and Zyra. So other than Xerath falling down the tier list, Lulu was the only other support change for 25.7, and her nerfs have been much more underwhelming than what we would have hoped. Despite the nerfs coming through, play rate and win rate of Lulu remains extremely elevated for this patch, as if the nerfs weren't even issued at all. You'd think that losing 10 damage on Q and having a higher cooldown on W would lead to a more significant drop in power, but Lulu's win rate is literally dropped by less than 0.5%. So depending on who you ask, this is either a really good thing or a really bad thing, because Lulu will not be leaving the support meta for 25.7, and we'll be giving her back her S tier spot. The changes to Umbral Glaive that went live for this patch have turned out pretty neutral so far. Neither Pyke nor Pantheon have seen significant spikes in power due to the changes, so it's not looking like Umbral Glaive is going to be making its way into meta on any other champions besides those two. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit SkillCapped.com and see the difference. So there you have it everyone, that's what the tier list is looking like as we reach the midway mark of the patch. Thank you all so much for watching, we'll see you in the next one.